Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Streightiff from Huntingdon Borough PD in Pennsylvania, 25 years total experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Streightiff. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Of course. You and I talked offline and you had some really interesting things that you guys are doing organizationally. So I'm excited to highlight that. But you also shared with me some personal stories and some things that you've gone through in your life. So can you give us a little bit of background, maybe how you got started in this career and some of the things that you've experienced throughout your life?
Yeah, sure. So I come from a family of law enforcement. I actually grew up in the department that I'm now the head of. So 40 plus years of being around this particular department. And when I say that, so my father was a law enforcement officer here. My uncle was a law enforcement officer here. My dad's sister was the first female officer employed by this department, one of three total. So just a lot of history, and that's really what drove me into the profession. I originally was choosing education, but the law enforcement bug sort of bit when I was in middle school, and from there on out, that's what I wanted to do with my life and my career. I did not start out here. I started out a little bit down the road, about 2 hours from here in Maryland, Hagerstown, and I spent 7 years there. Gained a lot of experience and was able to come back home to Huntingdon. It's where I wanted to raise my family. I'm very devoted and committed to the community here, and that's where I wanted to end up. So here I am. I spent time working in patrol, criminal investigations for over a decade here for this department, and then in 2021 I took over as chief, and I'm now in my 25th year total in law enforcement.
Love it. 2021, tough time
Yes.
to enter as a chief and to add
Yes.
the stressors of leadership too. What was that like?
Um, Challenging. So we were just on the cusp of coming out of COVID.
Mm.
There were a lot of different changes that were going on, both within the societal end of it, and also in our department. We saw a complete shift. So this department was really made up of the same individuals for many years. So it was a very older department. And then starting in the 2021 period, we really flipped. So now we're a very young department. So, I mean, you can do pros and cons on that. I get asked all the time, how busy is it? And for a small department, our population is about 7,000. We have 13 sworn officers. That includes myself, but we are very busy. And I don't know whether to attribute that to calls for service or just the proactiveness of the officers that we have here, or a combination of both. I haven't really been able to put my finger on it. But I'm really proud of where the department has come, the foundation that's been built for us, and what we continue to build upon and move forward.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I don't think that I knew that you came from a background of law enforcement and that you are now at the agency in which you kind of grew up around. So I think that's such a cool full circle story and moment for you. You had shared with me that you had experienced maybe some secondary vicarious trauma throughout your life. Would you be willing to share what that looked like and, when you started to realize that this was something that was impacting your life?
Yeah, sure. So I instruct for one of our border and county CIT programs, and some of the other trainings I do, I make sure I hit on secondary vicarious trauma. I think it's very important for law enforcement officers and those collaborating agencies to have a basis of understanding of what that looks like, and sort of tear down the stigma that revolves around mental health and our professions. So again, I come from a very strong background, familial background in law enforcement, being around it my entire life. One thing I did leave out, my dad was the chief of this department as well, so even a stronger connection. But during my time as a criminal investigator here, and I think I was in maybe year 14 total in law enforcement, I had a case that was presented to me, and and I'll preface that by saying when I did criminal investigations here, I really honed in my skill set into crimes against children and sexual assaults. So that's really where the basis of my expertise lies. So I had an incident where a youth had come forward and was reporting sexual abuse, with the perpetrator being a familial member. And the abuse had taken place from the age of 5 to the age of 12. What was unique about this situation is that victim, that child victim, had a very substantial mental health history as well. And at the same time of the report, or when that individual was choosing to come forward, they sustained a crisis event where they had to be hospitalized for mental health treatment. So my team was really scrambling as to what we were going to do, how we were going to handle that. And when I say team, I mean myself as a criminal investigator, our victim advocate, and our staff at our CAC, so our Children Advocacy Center in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. So what we determined best course of action was that the victim receive the appropriate mental health treatment, and that we coordinate with the facility that upon their discharge, we would arrange for that child forensic interview, which is exactly what happened. The child, it was the day after discharge from mental health facility, and we had the child forensic interview. Most of the time, you do not get a disclosure, but the advocacy centers are set up that it provides the safe and secure, unbiased environment for the child to disclose if they're comfortable enough, in their own words and on their own terms. And that's exactly what this child victim did. They fully disclosed, like a book, everything that had transpired. Probably one of the best disclosures I have observed in that setting. And after that process of a child disclosing, we always pull the team back together with the support individual, so whether it be a parent or guardian, and discuss next steps forward. So our next step forward would have been to locate the perpetrator and then do the interview, which is what our plan was, what we were going to do. So we went home that evening. I did something I normally don't do. I did check in with the family to make sure that everything was okay. And I was reassured that it was. And we just talked about some of the case proceedings, what we should look or what the family should look forward to. And I'm very transparent in any of my investigations with victims and victim families and support personnel. And so I went home that evening. I usually come back in the mornings between 5 and 6. And I can remember I came up from our locker room from getting changed for the day. I was in uniform. And the first call of the morning from our 911 center, which is right inside, it's right outside my office, same building, was for a missing child. So my partner and I were responding, and I wasn't even processing the address of the missing child. And when we were en route, it clicked that the address was that youth. So the way I always describe this when I'm training is that I want everybody to put themselves in my shoes and start processing that in a matter of like 24 hours. I have a child who was reporting sexual abuse to a mental health inpatient, to a child disclosing, and now to missing. So your gears are really turning. We got there. We followed protocol for that missing. One of the first things that I do is immediately do a recheck of the residence. The child was not present. There was one outbuilding to that house. It was an old cement cylinder block garage. Mom, who was a single mom, verified and adamantly affirmed that there was no way anybody could have access to that. She's the only one who had a key. It was padlocked, couldn't get in. So I gathered everything that I needed, went back to my PD so I could get her entered into the NCIC so that we could get her information out, so that if any other law enforcement agency would come in contact with that victim, that they would immediately secure her and we could start the process of recovery. And the moment that I got back to the PD, 911 was ringing again. And to this day, I've never listened to the 911 tape. I don't know if I misinterpreted what was said to me from the dispatcher, whether the dispatcher misinterpreted what was being reported to them, or whether what they were told was exactly what they were told. I mean, it was one of those three. I'm just, at this point, I don't know. Um, but what was relayed to me was that there was a gunshot victim at that residence where we just were for the missing kid. So again, if you're going back and processing everything in the past 24 hours, report of sexual abuse by a familial member for a substantial number of years, to mental health crisis, to full disclosure, to missing, and now we have a report of a gunshot victim. So my partner and I go flying back to the residence, and the hysterics that are going on in the house is just something I wouldn't want anybody else to experience. We see a lot and hear a lot in our job. That's probably one of the most difficult things to walk into. So fast forwarding a little bit, what had happened was that the youngest sibling of this youth victim had gained access to that outer building through a window and found their sibling had taken their life by hanging. Sometimes when I talk about this, I can get through it pretty easily. Other times, it's a little difficult for me to talk about, even to this day, after many years that have passed. So if I have to pause, I'm just going to just forewarn you. So moving to the next step now, I have from missing to suicide youth. So when we're in the academy, and as law enforcement, we're taught to be stoic and robotic and not let anything affect us. We're not supposed to show our feelings. And that's exactly what I did. I went into that robotic, structured mode and just started checking the boxes off. So fast forwarding again to about mid-afternoon, I'd reached a point where I was done with the day. I was tired. I went to my chief at the time and said, listen, I need to go home. I can't be here anymore. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I got, okay, see you tomorrow. I never had a follow-up. I had no one checking in on me. And it was just business as normal. So moving on down the road, I had a training maybe a couple months later after this incident. And the forensic interviewer who did that forensic interview was there with the rest of the CAC staff. And they said, hey, after this training, can you hold up so we can sit down and talk? I'm like, yeah, sure. And the conversation was, hey, this was a really difficult situation. I haven't been able to move forward. I've been receiving therapy. I think you need to do the same. I don't think you've processed. And it really invoked a lot of anger in me. And to the point where I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Probably in some more colorful language at the time, and just more or less put the walls up. I really I couldn't, in my mind, comprehend the fact that they were actually sitting there and saying that to me. I actually took great offense to it. Fast forward another 2 to 3 months, we had a whole MDT, so our multidisciplinary team for child abuse cases was in a retrain. And there was about 35 to 40 people in this room. A lot of close colleagues, collaborating agencies, close friends. So we were going around doing our introductions, and that child forensic interviewer was sitting to my left, and a really good friend of mine, who I call my aunt, but she's not really my aunt, runs one of our drug and alcohol counseling centers here in Huntingdon, was on my right. So the forensic interviewer looked at me when she started doing her introduction and said, I'm sorry. And I'm like, what's going on? So she started debriefing the case and dissecting it. As she was going through, I was losing control of myself to the point where I was uncontrollably shaking. I had that fishbowl feeling of like your head was just swimming. The room just felt very small. So my friend on my right, I remember her grabbing my leg and saying, well, what's wrong with you? And I said, that's my case. So I got to a point where I just wasn't communicating at all. So they had to evacuate the room. And we ended up doing just a debrief with myself. So it was at that point that I realized that that forensic interviewer was right. I never took the time to process that case. Unbeknownst to me, in that particular incident, I was sustaining a PTSD situation in which I was having a full anxiety attack. I'd probably say panic attack at the time because I really didn't know what was happening. Looking back now, I can associate what it was attributing it to. That child victim was the same age as my daughter when she was reporting. So I was relating a lot of my personal experiences in life with that particular incident. And then I come to realize that I had been blaming myself for many months. I blamed myself for that youth's death because I felt like I missed something. I didn't do enough. And it really caused the entire team to come together and reevaluate everything that we're doing. Conclusions that we did everything. There was no way of preventing. We do have extra measures in place at this time. But what I realized is that after 14 or 15 years in this career, that we are not robotic. We are not always stoic, and that we're human beings, and that we are allowed to feel, and we should be processing things that we experience. We see the worst and we hear the worst. And if we don't deal with it, it's going to come out in the worst ways than it did for me. And that's exactly the message that I give when I am out training and speaking to others. Looking back, there were so many signs. My behavior at both home and here at work. I am very lucky that my family is still intact. I became very withdrawn, very short-tempered, angry. I was never physical. It was just my mood. It could probably suck the air out of a room, just how I was feeling. I can remember officers saying they were always afraid to step into my office because they didn't know what mood or what version of me they were going to get. And that's all revolving around this one incident and me not fully processing it and realizing what exactly took place. Looking back and all the evidence that I gathered in that particular case, I can definitively say that there was nothing we could have done. I relinquished that guilt, although I probably still carry a little bit there with me. But I need people to, in this profession, in our collaborating agencies profession, to understand that, again, it's okay to feel. If something's bothering you, you need to recognize the signs in that, or recognize the signs in your coworkers, or those that maybe that you supervise, and get them the appropriate resources and support systems in place. I did not have that. I think had I had that and discussions would have happened, the outcome would have been a lot different for me. But now that I understand it and I can recognize it, I try to help as many as I can, because I don't ever want anybody to go through and experience what I did.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. My question for you is, because you said there was, obviously this timeline where you felt really offended that someone would assume that you needed help. Then you realized, through that debrief that you genuinely did need help. What were those things that you did after you realized, okay, this is really impacting my personal life. This is impacting my professional life. What did you do after that allowed you to get to this space where you can now do trainings and you can tell people that it's okay to be human. It's okay to reach out for resources, that, we are going to feel all the emotions. You're not a robot. Was there anything specific that you did between, that kind of bridge of that, like one debrief of like, oh yeah, you're right, I do need to process this, and where you are now?
So I put pride aside. We always say to new officers, you're not going to learn everything in the academy. They'll give you the groundwork, but the real work's going to come from the street and the experience. And that's exactly what I move forward with. I think destigmatizing the mental health aspect in our job. I was always afraid that if we showed, when I say we, I mean like me as an officer or other officers, if we show any sign of weakness, then you're vulnerable. And whether it be your governing body, your municipal government who oversees the departments and provides you funding, or your collaborating agencies, or even peers will think you're weak.
Mm.
I dispelled all that. And I did that through a lot of therapy and talking through everything and realizing that what I was experiencing was okay and that it was normal. So putting the normalcy in of it and realizing that we too are humans and things are going to affect us. And then making sure then that, again, I'm relaying that information, whether I'm really in somebody's, I don't want to say like in somebody's face, like being aggressive, but being present, proactive with it, or doing it in the background and just observing and making sure that those resources are in place. So I always talk about making sure that you have somebody you can talk to, because you need to debrief, you need to unpackage everything that's there. But I also talk about your outlets. So not only was I talking with a therapist, and that's very selective on who I spoke with, because you're not comfortable with your therapist, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So I was very selective on who that was. But then my outlets, choosing something that you enjoy, something that helps you to relax and takes you away from, like for me, taking me away from the office. So I got a personal trainer that I was with 2 to 3 days a week. And then on the off days, I was on trail running. So you need not only that talking outlet for packaging, but you also need that resource outlet to get rid of all that extra, I call it negative energy, so that you can have that reset and be refreshed. And that's an everyday process. It still is for me. Obviously, when I still talk about it, sometimes it hits harder than others. Sometimes I get through it and I'm not affected. Sometimes I get really choked up and I can't talk about it. But this is part of my therapy too, is continuing to talk about it. I think sharing personal assessments is so much more effective and profound than just reading something from a textbook. You can relate really to peer level, and they can see. I mean, I'm not somebody who just has 5 years on the job. I'm on the downside of my career at this point towards retirement. But I think seeing somebody who has all those years of experience and saying, hey, this is okay and this is normal is much better, again, than just having somebody or some class read something from a book or on a screen.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it is really challenging. I've had those times in my life where I didn't want people to think that I was weak. And so I didn't want to share those hard times with other people or those messy times. And now I view it as such a superpower to be able to share and to help others, and hopefully the other people can learn from our experiences and maybe not, walk in the exact same path. Maybe they can choose healthier, outlets or options for themselves. But I think that if we have the ability to, and I don't want to say it in a way of, if you don't do this, you're not brave. But I think that it takes a lot of courage to step out in front of anyone, but especially your peers, or your loved ones, and to say, hey, this really affected me and this is what happened. But then I also think it's really powerful to share what has helped you, because I think that the more we can do that, the more normal these things are going to feel. And historically, I think we've all tried to hide those things. And so it feels like it's something that should be hidden. It feels like it's something that you should be embarrassed by, but it's not, and so I appreciate you coming on here. And I know you said that you felt that, if you were weak and vulnerable, that was a bad thing. But I actually think that you coming on here and being vulnerable showed how strong you really are and your ability to process what you went through and to grow in spite of or because of these things. And then now to be in a position where you can help other people, there's so much strength and courage in that. And I would say everyone listening would agree with that. And so I think if we can step outside of ourselves and we can have that vulnerability and we can have that courage to talk about the things that were hard, but also the things that helped, it's only going to make all of us better.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, one thing I do for my department now, whether the officers realize it or not, with wellness programs, I mean, sometimes there's a lot of fees that are attached to it, and municipalities like mine just don't have the ability to do that. So we had to come up with some type of strategy to work around it. So I do a check in, check out with my officers, whether they realize it or not. And it's like a school teacher. You're with them. You're with your kids for so long. You get to know them, and if there's something different or something off, you're going to pick up on it. So with my officers, if I know that there's something wrong, I'm constantly, "Are you okay? What's up? Do you need something?" And I'll continue doing it until I'm satisfied with myself that they are okay. It may be me following up on phone calls or text messages as well, just to make sure. Like, I don't want anybody to ever feel like they're left to themselves and their own devices and trying to work through stuff without any help. I am partnered with a colleague at the Pennsylvania State Police, so if there is a big event that I can pull her in to help with debriefs if necessary, she's constantly checking in. And we now have a co-responder here in my department who works with our crisis or our mental health, and she's able to provide services as well. So it's been a full circle from my particular incident to where we are now.
Yeah. And you are also able to secure a grant that has helped you to, put forth some of these initiatives as well. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to do that? Because I don't know if people realize, but the majority of agencies across the country are small like yours. And so the majority of agencies across the country struggle with the same, finite amount of resources and, want to be able to fund some of these things. So how were you able to secure the grant to be able to then, put forth some of these programs that do cost money?
Yeah. So a lot of work.
I'm sure.
I mean, I know a lot of my colleagues can attest to the fact that police departments cost local and whatever, county governments a lot of money. It's one of the biggest line item budget items. So you have to be creative. So I look every day for grant opportunities. Most of my grant funding has come from PCCD here in Pennsylvania, and I had no experience in grant writing. I took a shot at it. The AI features were not available at the time, so it was gathering resources and research and data and putting it together. It was a lot of hours on my end, hours that sometimes you don't have, but you recognize that if you don't put forth that effort or at least try, you're never going to get it. And that's exactly my mindset. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put it together. I'm going to submit it. If we get it, we get it. If we don't, then I'll move on to the next. Luckily for me, I got my first grant, and after that, I got my foot in the door, and it just got easier and easier and easier. So every year, I develop a checklist of my wants and my needs, and I prioritize them. If I don't have the funding for it, then I seek out specific grants, whether it's grants from private entities, whether it be through the state, whether it be through the federal government. I see what grants fit those needs of the department, and then I gather the data and then I submit it. I've been fortunate enough too that we have a very supportive community. So with our co-responder program, we had money that was allotted for that position from another agency or another organization that fully funded it for its first 2 years. And then we have an agency that picked it up and is currently funding it now. We have private donors who support other entities like our canine unit. But as far as, developing different programs, having money available for training, expanding like our IT and infrastructure here at the PD, that's all extra money that we got just by taking that chance and submitting it. And things that we've been very fortunate on that end.
I really like the mentality of if we don't have the money, we'll find the money.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes, I think we've all been guilty of this. If we're like, well, can't be done, but for you to be like, hey, maybe it can't be done within the constraints of what we have right now, but I'm going to do everything I can to seek out funding to be able to then afford this. And it is hard. It's a lot of work, and you already are wearing, 15 different hats between your professional and, personal life. But I like that mentality of, if it's a priority, if it's something that is important to you and, the success of your organization, if you don't have the money, there are other avenues in which you can find the money.
Yeah, I always tell people, I can be very reserved, but I can also have a very loud voice. I usually don't take no for an answer. And if I'm not getting the answer that I want, I keep knocking on doors and more doors until they open. And I was told by a colleague at one time that my position would be more political than most. And that individual was 100% right. So I have really reached out to all of my legislators, both at the local, county, state, and federal levels. There really are no political lines when it comes to the work that we're doing, and it takes everybody working together. And that's really what I've seen. So I've made my voice known, I've made my face known, and I try to make contact with those individuals or their offices at least once a month, just to keep that contact going. So I know if I need something, I know who to contact. If they need something, obviously they know how to get a hold of me too. So bridging those gaps, coming out of your individual silos and communicating is key.
Yeah, love it. Thank you. My last question, I know you already do a lot of, training, and you've already given some really good advice, but for the younger generation, what words of wisdom would you share with them that, maybe you did wish that you would have learned earlier in your career?
Yeah. So just talking in law enforcement in general, I wish somebody would have in the academy sector, or even in like any role model or peer I would have had at that very early age, even though it was a couple of years ago at this point. Just what is said and reminded me or my group that we're human. We're going to make errors. We're going to make mistakes. It requires us to learn and grow. You're going to see some of the worst things. You're going to hear some of the worst things. Some things the general public will never experience. You need to know how to handle that, process it, and know where to get your resources. Be there to support each other. Do not leave anybody to fend for themselves. We are a team. I think if I would have been given that information and taught that at the very beginning, again, I think my outcome with my particular incident with that youth victim would have been a lot different. I think we're taught so much to internalize everything and not talk about it and just let it roll off our backs. But that's not normal. If there's one thing I could say, that's not the normal.
Yeah.
You need to be able to let that you need to have an outlet for all that information. You can't keep it bottled up.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story and being vulnerable and sharing some of the things that came out of that experience that you're doing to help your organization. So I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course.